How you going, folks? You're very welcome along to John's Garage this week. You'll notice we're doing something a little bit different. Having a look around the car first, going to take it for a drive then, and we'll just see how this works out for today. So today we're going to feature a Citroen BX GTi. Alright, so a real hot hatch from the 1980s. A little bit about Citroen BX model range. Started production in 1982. It was the first joint venture between Peugeot and Citroen after the formation of PSA. It went on to pretty much save Citroen as a brand and as a mark, and that's why we have Citroen today. Now I assume we're all very familiar with the quirky cars of old, the quirky Citroens, innovative features, disc brakes, hydropneumatic suspension, all of those different types of things, swiveling headlamps in the DS range, and so on and so forth. So Citroen, what were they bringing us in the 80s? Well, we had the hot hatch revolution of the 1980s, spearheaded by the Golf GTi, and this was Citroen's offering to that bundle. 1.9 litre valve in this particular model engine. Now, there is a difference between the 16-valve 1.9 GTi engine in this and a Peugeot 205, and that is the inlet manifold is a little bit different in this car and in the Peugeot 405 MI16. Same thing, and it gives them a little bit of an up boost in power to 158 horsepower, brake horsepower. Brilliant car back in its day, lovely handling. Possibly not as pin sharp maybe as a 405, but certainly a lot more forgiving than a lot of the German offerings at the time. That hydropneumatic suspension gives it an absolute magic carpet ride. And even to this day, taking this car for a drive earlier today, it was absolutely sublime on a main road, on a motorway, and even on the back roads. Hello, Mr. Wasp, do you mind buggering off? So, what did you get for your money? Well, you got electric windows all round, power steering, the hydropneumatic suspension as I already mentioned. The suspension was slightly different between this and a regular BX. There was stiffer anti-roll bar bushings used, or larger anti-roll bar bushings, and also the spheres on the suspension were a little bit stiffer as well. They weren't. There was two different types, sport and comfort. This particular one is fitted with the sport kind of spheres, which firms up that ride just that little bit more. As I said though, over its regular suspension counterparts like in the Peugeot 405, same chassis, just different suspension, it was probably a little bit softer on the turns and a little bit more body roll. That's no bad thing though, in my opinion. Given that I have a bad back, I prefer the softer seats and the softer suspension, as did quite a few buyers as well. These were produced up until 1993, when they were discontinued and then replaced by the Xantia, but right up until their dying day, until they were discontinued, they were selling like hotcakes. One of the best-selling diesel engines. Put the XUD diesel engine on the map for PSA, which I suppose popularised diesel cars amongst a lot of reps in the UK and Ireland and the continent at the same time, and really helped to make diesel a mainstream fuel at the time. It was seen as something a bit agricultural, a bit rough up until then. Okay, so what quirky Citroen features still existed when it came to the BX? Well, originally it had rotary dials and rotary speedometers in the first generation, but of course back then there wasn't a GTi. It started off in the sportier versions just before the facelift arrived in with the Sport model. Then it proceeded on to the GT, then the GTi, then the GTi 16 valve as well, which is... Okay, so what did you get for your money? Very large boot, very large interior, brilliant glass area, so when you're driving you can see lovely and clearly out. Big problem with modern cars. Great sunroof, full-size sunroof. On the interior you had the plush sport seats in velour. You had self-centering power steering, Citroen trait. For younger viewers maybe who aren't as familiar with Citroens of old, you also have Citroen's infamous braking system. Works absolutely superbly so long as you just rest your foot on the brakes. If you push down hard on that brake, these brakes will lock up and send you straight through the steering wheel. An unfortunate characteristic, but once you get used to them, they're actually a brilliant braking system. Of course, one of the big issues with the braking system is if one of the hydraulic pipes breaks on the suspension, if one bursts or a leak springs open, you pretty much lose your braking, your steering and your suspension all in one go, and it can make for a rather nervous moment when it comes to stopping. You have your 5-speed automatic gearbox, no air conditioning in here, but you got electric windows all around, which all, I'm thankful to say, work. In fact, everything in this car works, which is great. Lovely little quirky features still carrying over into the Mark II, like the door handles, placement of some of the switches, that soft centered steering wheel, just in case you're in a crash. This is pre-airbag days. Brilliant adjustment on the seats. They're actually quite comfortable and quite supportive even still. Lovely amount of dials and nice and clear layout. Some of the numbers a little bit small, but we won't worry too much about that. And of course, just around the car, there's only 3 badges to let you know that this is a GTI. 2 on the rear quarters and 1 on the rear boot, and that's pretty much it. Other than that, you get a lovely set of alloy wheels, and unusual for the time, they're in a darker colour. I know that's commonplace nowadays to have them painted, but at the time this car was current, that was actually quite an unusual characteristic. Brilliant access into the rear, so for the family man or the family rep, this could actually be quite a spacious family car for you as well, unlike, say, the 205 GTi, which was a little bit small. Of course, lovely conveniences as well. You got your little red mark reflectors on the door for when you're opening it at night. And of course, to keep the kids happy back in the 1980s, you have ashtrays and a central cigarette lighter as well in this car. So you'll have lovely, happy, nicotine-addicted kids back in the 1980s. And Mr. Wasp, bugger off, please. Of course, another period touch, which actually cropped up in our last week's video of the Toyota Corolla, is it says Citroen right across the back window. That's an owner fitment. And of course, that lets everybody know what it is you're driving. Not that they would have been in any doubt whatsoever from the wedge of cheese driving in front of them at the time. But a lovely little period thing. It used to be quite common at the time. I remember quite a lot of cars driving around at the time with this. So a couple of interesting pieces of information about these particular cars. The drag coefficient is actually quite low, and drag coefficient was a big selling point in the 1980s, and that explains the wedge shape. That helped it achieve a very respectable fuel economy across the range, no matter what engine it was. The other thing which also helped was Citroen's practice at the time of experimenting with materials. So the bonnet in this particular car, rear quarter and boot are all made of plastic. Doors are lightweight steel, as is the wing, and the body frame itself, so the A-pillars and the frame itself, they're all pretty light materials as well. Of course, that can lead to a bit of an issue with rust, especially on the A-pillar and especially down here behind the door, the sills as well also, and the boot floor. They can all be problem areas, so please just check those out. Other than that, do your standard checks when buying a car of this age. Are there leaks? Is there oil visible? Is there head gasket failure? Is the shift in and out of gear okay? All of those usual kind of things you're going to look for, and of course rust obviously at the same time. Parts supply is pretty good. Lots of parts available from France, from Chevronics in the UK. I know Brexit is putting a bit of an issue on importing parts and duties and all that, but parts are pretty well available. I do know, hidden away in Ireland, there's a number of GTIs and Hurricanes and a few other different specials of the Citroen BX. So listen, they're a great car, and I'd highly recommend to anyone to buy one. I think they're absolutely smashing car. Okay, so what was this car like to drive today? Well, I took it for a good drive. Mix of roads we had, actually a little bit of motorway, back roads and so on and so forth. And I have to say, it absolutely drove perfectly. No issues, kept well up with modern traffic. Now, I would say anyone looking for a 1980s sports car to just tread carefully in terms of what you're getting. It's 160 odd horsepower, it's 1.9 litres, it's a GTI model, so it is the sport model. But this is 1980s sports we're talking about here. It will keep up with modern traffic, but it's not going to set the world on fire. Like, I would estimate that a 1 litre Toyota Yaris would overtake this and would happily keep up with it all day long. But it's just not going to feel the same, okay? It's not going to have the same joy when you're driving it. It's not going to have the same comfort and quirkiness, and even just that feeling that, you know what, I'm keeping something really special on the road, something different, something nice, and something, in my opinion, beautiful. Now, I did own a Citroen BX. Mine was a BX 16 TGS, so it was an automatic. It was slow, it was all this thing, it had no power steering, but by God, it felt French. And just like this car, you hit speed bumps at speed, you don't feel them. You don't get thrown around the car doesn't want to shake to pieces. It just feels lovely as you're driving it, okay? Parts supply for these, I have no issues. There's a brilliant company in the UK called Chevronics. They supply everything. Now, of course, with Brexit, that can be a bit of an issue and a bit of an extra cost getting in parts, so you'll need to figure that out maybe yourself. But if you are stuck, France is full of these. They're still on the road, they're still an everyday car, everything can be gotten for them. For anyone interested in buying one of these, what should they be looking out for? Well, you're going to have your usual issues with the 1.9. In fact, any of the petrol or diesel engines, I'm just going to say head gasket failure and oil leaks. Just be careful of the two of those. Running issues can be a bit of a challenge on the petrol engines, not so much the diesel engines. They're pretty hardy, but sometimes the petrol engines can be a little bit hard to tune. I will be aware of that also. Suspension, most people for some reason are afraid of it. It's actually probably the simplest thing on this car. If you can get a mechanic, or if you yourself are familiar with the system, it's not a challenge. Your biggest issue you're going to have at this stage is pipes becoming aged out and bursting. That's going to be the biggest problem you're going to have, and is the replacement of those. There's two pipes going into the bulkhead that are notoriously difficult to change, but they can be changed. A little bit of time, a little bit of effort, and that's probably your biggest issue. Bearings in the rear axle can also wear out over time, and they give it a kind of arch look on the rear wheels. Again, that can be an issue, but it can be dealt with nowadays as well. And as I say, part supply is pretty good. Body panels, again, tend not to rust out. Boot and bonnet are plastic, so you're never going to have rust there. Biggest issue can be mismatched colours. Colours can fade between the metal and the plastic. That can fade at different rates, and that's going to be a bit of an issue. Other than that, I can't think of anything really bad to say about the car. The biggest thing, there was two things that took most of these cars off the road. Number one was actually rust. Despite the fact that Citroen talks so much about how rust-proof this car was and how much plastic was used and galvanizing was used, the sills, the A-pillars, B-pillars, and the underneath the bonnet, and the bulkhead, they can all be problem areas, so just please check those. The steel used in these to achieve a really low weight is actually really thin, and it can rust. If rust gets in there, boot floor, forgot to mention that also, please just be aware that it is a problem. If you're seeing one of these and it's rusty, I'd probably see it more as a spares car than anything else. Other than that, what have I got to say? It's a beautiful car. It's a credit to the last couple of owners. I actually have seen this car on Done Deal a number of times. I've often said, God, I'd love to look at it, and every time it comes up, it's just out of my reach, or there's something else going on, and that's what happened this time. I missed out on it because I was doing another project. But all credit to the owner. He snapped it up. He loves it. He's using it quite regularly, has no problems with it, and says it's an absolutely gorgeous car to drive. And I have to agree with him. I've taken it for a good spin, and I absolutely love it. I think it's a lovely car. So listen, thank you very much for joining me on John's Garage again this week. I would ask you, please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, share a couple of thoughts, a couple of views on these cars. I know in Ireland the diesel was probably the most popular one, less so the petrols, but let me know, what do you think? Citroen BX GTi, is it going to be future classic, future desirable? Is it already desirable? Is it already a classic? You let me know. Other thing is, if anybody's interested in having their car feature on the channel, don't forget to send me a message, contact me, let me know, and I'll happily feature it on the channel. And listen, thank you very much for watching. Best of luck.